She was 18, and her grandfather had signed her out of his life on a Tuesday afternoon while she was at school. No argument. No warning. He had simply gone to a notary on Fulton Street with her cousin Daryl sitting beside him, and he had transferred the deed to the 31 acres she had grown up believing would someday be hers. The land, the farmhouse, the outbuildings, everything, to Daryl's name, for the recorded sum of $1 in consideration of family obligations. And by the time Elsa Varn got off the school bus at 4:15, the paperwork was done and cooling in a manila folder on the kitchen table. She left with $7.60 in her coat pocket, a duffel bag, and the knowledge that somewhere beneath the collapsed shed at the back of that property, a shed nobody had touched in 30 years, there was a hatch in the floor that her grandfather had told her, just once, when she was 9 years old, led to something he'd put there to keep safe. He had never said what. She had never forgotten. Welcome. If you're new here, this channel tells stories like this one, about the turns a life can take that nobody sees coming. If a story like Elsa's means something to you, we'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop us a comment. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Her full name was Elsa May Varn, and she had been raised on that land since she was 4 years old. Her parents had died together. A car accident on an icy county road in February, when Elsa was still young enough that the sharpest thing she retained from before was not their faces, but the smell of her mother's coat. A wool coat, dark green, that always smelled like cold air, and something warm underneath it, cedar, maybe, or the particular warmth of a person who held you often. After the accident, her grandfather, Wendell Varn, had taken her in without ceremony or particular tenderness. He was not a tender man, but with the consistency of someone who understood obligation and took it seriously. He fed her. He kept her warm. He saw to it that she got to school on time and had what she needed for it, mostly, with some exceptions around the edges that she learned early not to push on. Wendell had farmed the 31 acres for 40 years. Soybeans and corn in the main fields, a kitchen garden behind the house, a small orchard of 8 apple trees that had been planted by the woman who owned the land before him, a widow named Celia Prentice who had run the property alone for 22 years after her husband died and had sold it to Wendell in 1971 for a price that Elsa would later learn had been considerably below market, because Celia had liked Wendell's father and wanted the land to stay with a family that would work it rather than subdivide it. Celia had been dead for decades by the time Elsa came to live there. But her presence was still on the land in the way that the presence of someone who worked a place for a long time stays in it, in the shape of the orchard rose, in the stone edging around the kitchen garden that had been laid by hand, in the way the light hit the south field in the late afternoon and made it look like something. Painted. The shed at the back of the property was Celia's, not Wendell's. He had told Elsa that much. Celia had used it for tools and for storage, and the roof had gone in the winter of 1989, a heavy snowfall, more than the old timbers could bear, and Wendell had never repaired it and never torn it down either, just left it where it fell, the roof caved in at the center, the walls leaning inward, the whole structure slowly becoming part of the ground. He kept the cattle gate at the back of the east field padlocked, and the shed was on the far side of that gate, and Elsa had not been inside it since she was 9 years old, when Wendell had taken her back there for reasons he had not explained, lifted a corner of the collapsed roofing to show her the floor underneath, and pointed at a seam in the old floorboards, a hatch set flush with an iron ring recessed into the wood. "There's things down there," he said, "that need to stay down there." She had looked at it for a long time. "Whose things?" "Mine," he said. "Now come away." She had. She did not go back. But she did not forget. The quality of Wendell Varn's guardianship was not cruel in any active sense. He gave her shelter and food and the particular kind of attention that consists mostly of making sure a thing does not break, without much interest in how it grows. He attended her school events when they required an adult signature and skipped them otherwise. He answered her questions with the minimum number of words that constituted an answer. He was not unkind to her face. He simply was not present to her in the way that the people who loved her should have been. And she had learned early that expecting presence from him was a waste of her own energy. He had a son from his first marriage who lived in Georgia and called twice a year and was not relevant to the day-to-day. He had a nephew, Daryl Varn, who was 41, who drove a tow truck in the county seat and visited on holidays and occasionally on random weekdays when he had something to ask Wendell about that Elsa was not included in. Daryl had a quality she had no precise word for, a way of being in a room that made the room feel slightly smaller, slightly more about him than it had been a moment before. He was not rude to Elsa. He simply looked past her. The way you look past furniture, you have no interest in moving. She was 16 when she first heard Darrell mention the land. She was in the kitchen, doing homework at the table, and Darrell and Wendell were on the back porch with the door not fully closed, and Darrell said something about acreage values and what the county assessor had put on the east field, and what a man he knew had gotten for a comparable parcel 2 townships over. Wendell said something she couldn't make out. Darrell said, "She's not going to farm it, Wendell." There was a pause. Wendell said something again, short, and Darrell said, "All right." All right, just thinking out loud. She did not say anything about what she had heard. She had her grandfather's steadiness, if nothing else of his, the capacity to hold something in mind without letting it move through her face. She turned 17. She turned 18 in March, on a day Wendell acknowledged with a card purchased from the drugstore in town, signed in his careful old hand, no message beyond her name and his. She thanked him. He nodded. They had dinner. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday, she came home from school to the manila folder on the kitchen table. Wendell was in the living room in his chair. He did not get up. He waited for her to read it, which she did, standing at the table in her coat, reading it twice to be sure she understood. Then she set it down and went into the living room and stood in the doorway. "Daryl," she said, "he'll work the land. Keep it in the family." "I'm family. You're provided for," he said. "There's $500 in an envelope in the kitchen drawer. That's yours. I did what I could do." She did not raise her voice. She did not cry in front of him. She asked if she needed to leave that night or if she had until morning, and he said she had until morning, and she nodded once, went to her room, and packed the duffel. She took the $500 from the kitchen drawer and put it in her coat. Then she sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet and thought about the hatch. She thought about it for a long time. She left at 7 the next morning without waking him. The duffel, her coat, the $507.60, and the particular settled feeling of someone who has decided not to be surprised anymore. She spent 2 nights in the county shelter, which was clean and competent and staffed by a woman named Greta, who had heard every kind of story and had a way of listening that made the telling of it feel less like an emergency. Greta helped her apply for emergency housing assistance and gave her the name of a woman on the other side of the county. A farmer named Paulette Shea, who sometimes hired for the season and sometimes had a spare room she made available to young women who were between situations and reliable. She called Paulette Shea from the shelter phone on a Thursday morning. "You know farm work?" Paulette said. "I know it," Elsa said. "Come Friday." She came Friday. Paulette was 67, short, with hands that looked like they'd been working since before Elsa was born, which they had. She ran 80 acres of mixed crops with one full-time hand and a rotating door of seasonal help. And she ran it with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it alone for 23 years and had developed very little patience for inefficiency in any form. She showed Elsa the spare room, which was small and faced west and had a hook on the back of the door and a quilt on the bed that had been made from old work shirts. She told Elsa breakfast was at 5:30, and she was expected at it. Elsa was there at 5:15. Paulette noticed and said nothing, but she poured the coffee without being asked. She worked the season. She worked the following season. Paulette paid her fairly, housed her well, and occasionally, on evenings when the work was done and the light was going, sat on the back porch with her and talked in the comfortable, undemanding way of someone who did not require reciprocity to keep a conversation going. There were evenings when they said almost nothing at all, just sat with the sound of the field settling and the far-off hum of a tractor still working somewhere in the county. And it was enough. There was a particular smell to the end of a harvest day that Elsa had known since childhood. Cut stalks and turned earth and the faint sweetness of something drying, and being inside it again felt less like starting over than like being returned to something she had not known she still needed. Elsa learned things from Paulette that she could not have named as lessons, but that arranged themselves in her over time into a kind of knowledge about soil and weather and the patience required to work with both, about what it meant to maintain a place rather than just occupy it, about the difference between owning land and belonging to it. She learned that belonging to a piece of land meant showing up to it even when nothing required you to, just to walk it, just to see what it needed. Paulette did this every morning at first light, before coffee, before anything, just a slow circuit of the fields. Elsa started doing it too, without being told. Paulette never remarked on it. She just made enough coffee for two. It was Paulette who mentioned Celia Prentice. They were talking about the county one evening. Paulette had grown up nearby, had known many of the same families, and Elsa mentioned, carefully, that she had grown up on what had been the Prentice land before Wendell bought it. Paulette set her coffee down. "Celia Prentice," she said. "You grew up on Celia's place. You knew her?" Everybody knew Celia. She was. Paulette searched for the word. She was one of those people. You know, the ones that hold a neighborhood together without making any fuss about it. She was quiet a moment. She used to leave that back shed unlocked all winter. Didn't matter who you were. Migrant workers, people passing through with nowhere to stop. If you needed a place out of the cold for a night, the shed was open. There was always a blanket in there, always some canned goods on the shelf. She never told anyone she did it. You only knew if you needed it. Elsa sat with that for a while. What happened to her? Sold the land when she got too old to work it. Went to live with her daughter in Columbus. Died a few years later. Paulette picked up her coffee again. She was the kind of person you don't replace. Elsa thought about the hatch all the way to sleep that night. She had been working on what came next for nearly a year now, quietly, the way she did everything. She had looked up Darrell Varn's name in the county property records, which were public, and confirmed that the transfer had gone through as the manila folder had said. She had looked up property law at the library in a book on Ohio probate and deed law that was 20 years old but covered the basics, and she had found one thing that snagged in her mind and did not let go. A deed transfer could be challenged if it could be shown that the grantor was not acting freely or had already disposed of the property in a prior and conflicting instrument. She was not a lawyer. She did not know if this applied. But she knew that Wendell had told her when she was 9 that there were things beneath that hatch that needed to stay there. And she knew that nobody, in all the years since the transfer, had gone near that shed. She called the county recorder's office. The woman who answered was patient and precise. She confirmed that the Varn parcel was registered to Daryl Varn following a deed transfer in the spring. She confirmed that there were no liens and no encumbrances on record. She also, and here she paused, as if reading something unexpected, confirmed that there was a notation on file from 1979, a recorded document she described as a private trust instrument bearing the name of Wendell Varn and referencing the Varn parcel. She said she couldn't tell Elsa more than that over the phone. She said Elsa would need to come in and request to see the full file. She came in on a Monday morning. The man at the records desk was named Walt Ferris, according to his nameplate, who was the kind of county employee who had been doing the same job for so long that he had developed a deep, quiet expertise in it and a mild contempt for anyone who underestimated the county records office. He pulled the file himself. He spread it on the counter and pointed without speaking. The 1979 document was a private trust declaration, recorded but never activated. In it, Wendell Varn had placed the 31 acres into a trust designated for the benefit of his direct lineal descendants in perpetuity, with specific language that prohibited any sale or transfer outside the trust without the written consent of all living beneficiaries. At the time of the signing, there were no living beneficiaries other than Wendell himself. But in 1994, when Elsa's father was still alive, an amendment had been filed. Same notary, same language, adding Elsa's father's name as a co-beneficiary. Her father had died 2 years later. Under the terms of the trust, his interest passed to his lineal heir, to Elsa. Walt Ferris looked at her over the counter. "You'll want a lawyer," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not supposed to tell you this," he said. "But the trust is still on file." The deed transfer to Daryl Varn was recorded without any reference to it. Whether that was a mistake or something else, he stopped. "You'll want a lawyer," he said again. She was already going to be warm, and she was grateful he'd been direct. That settled in her differently than most things had in a long time. If this story is meaning something to you right now, and we hope it is, this would be a good moment to subscribe so you're here for the next one. These stories take time and care to find, and we'd hate for you to miss what's coming. We'll be right back to Elsa. She found a lawyer through the legal aid clinic in the county seat. Her name was Adaize Obi, and she was young and careful and did not overpromise. She read the file that Elsa brought her, and she read it a second time, and then she set it down on her desk and said, "This is real. I know. The trust wasn't dissolved. It was just ignored or not known about. The question is which one." Elsa thought about Daryl on the back porch, talking about acreage values, talking about what a man he knew had gotten for comparable land 2 townships over. She thought about the manila folder on the table, and Wendell in his chair in the living room, and the way he had said she was provided for as if $500 and the word provided were the same thing. "It wasn't not known about," she said. Adaize nodded slowly. She said the process would take time, filing a petition, serving Darrell, waiting for a response, potentially a hearing. She said the strength of the case depended on documentation. She said Elsa would need to be patient. Elsa told her she had been patient her whole life and was not worried about more of it. She went to the shed on a Saturday in October. Paulette drove her without being asked, because that was how Paulette was. She noticed when something mattered and showed up without making a speech about it. She parked at the edge of the east field and waited in the truck. Elsa climbed the cattle gate. The padlock had been cut. Darrell had changed it after the transfer, but the gate was just a gate. She crossed the field to the shed. The grass in the east field was long and gone to seed, the kind of neglect that happens in the second year of ownership when the new owner's attention is elsewhere and the land is just waiting. She noticed it the way you notice things you know how to read. She crossed the field without hurrying. She had not been here in 9 years. The collapse had settled further in that time. The roof was nearly flat now, pressed down by its own weight and a decade of winters, and the east wall had given way and lay in a long ruin of gray lumber, silvered the color of old weather, the nails pulling out of the boards in slow arcs where the wood had warped and released them. Milkweed had grown up through the gaps on the south side. A bird, she didn't see which kind, startled out of the debris when she got close. But the floor was still there. She could see it through the collapsed timbers, the old boards still solid where they hadn't been exposed to weather. The planks, gray-brown and close-grained, the kind of wood that was cut when the trees were old enough to mean it. She moved the timber she needed to move. It took 40 minutes, shifting the pieces one by one to the side, her breath misting in the October air, her hands going cold. She did not stop. The hatch was there. The iron ring was dark with rust. The wood around it was soft at one edge, water damaged, but the hatch itself held when she pulled. It came up with the sound of something that had been sealed for a long time and resisted being opened, and then gave all at once, and cold air rose from below, and she was looking down a short wooden staircase into a root cellar that had been dug into the clay and lined with old brick. She climbed down. It was about 8 feet square. A dirt floor tamped hard, a wooden shelf along one wall holding 4 mason jars of something long since gone bad, their lids domed with pressure. A second shelf, higher, out of easy reach, holding a metal strongbox, padlocked, about the size of a large dictionary. And beside the strongbox, folded inside a rubber-banded envelope that had gone waxy with age, a document she could read even in the thin light from above, a carbon copy of a deed, the original deed, recorded in 1952, when Celia Prentice had purchased the land from the estate of her husband's family, with a handwritten notepaper clipped to it that read, in handwriting she did not recognize, but that was old and precise. For whoever needs this most, C.P. Celia Prentice. Elsa sat on the bottom step of the root cellar staircase with the envelope in her hands and the October light coming down through the open hatch above her, and thought about a woman she had never met who had left a shed, unlocked all winter so that people with nowhere to stop could find a blanket and a place out of the cold. A woman who had sold her land to a man she trusted to work it, because she wanted it to stay with a family. A woman who had left something in the ground below a shed that was already falling, in an envelope with a note that said for whoever needs this most, and had been patient enough to leave it there until the right person came. The strongbox took a locksmith and cost her $60. Inside, 9 savings bonds. U.S. Series E, purchased between 1958 and 1969 in denominations of $50 to $500, fully matured and at full maturity after decades of compounding interest, worth considerably more than their face values. A lawyer's letter yellowed from a firm in Columbus, confirming the bonds had been purchased in Celia Prentice's name and left for the benefit of the future steward of this land, whosoever that may be, with the hope that they will care for it, as I have tried to. The bonds had never been cashed. They had simply waited. Walt Ferris, when she brought him the carbon copy of the 1952 deed, confirmed it matched the county record exactly and was a legitimate original. Daisy, when she saw the bonds, called a colleague who specialized in savings bonds and got a valuation, $31,400 and some dollars, at current redemption value, given their maturity dates and the compounding schedules. She set the figure on her desk between them. Celia Prentice left this for you, Daisy said. She left it for whoever needed it, Elsa said. The legal case resolved the following spring. Darrell Varn, when served with the petition and the documentation of the 1979 trust, did not contest it. His lawyer sent a letter declining to respond and CC'd Wendell's name at the top, which told Elsa everything she needed to know about who had made the decision. The land reverted to the trust. Elsa, as the sole living beneficiary, became its steward. Not its owner in the simple sense. The trust language was specific about that, and she honored it, but its keeper. The one responsible for it. She heard from Wendell once. He called on a Thursday evening, 6 months after the case closed, and he was not hostile. He sounded, if anything, tired. He said he had not known about the bonds. She believed him about that, if not about everything else. He said he supposed things had worked out. She said she supposed they had. He said he hoped she was well. She said she was. She did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and she had learned from Paulette, from Walt Ferris, from a woman she'd never met who had left a note in the ground, that the right amount to say was usually less than you thought. She moved back to the land the following summer. She did not move into the farmhouse. Darrell had been living in it for 2 years, and she let him stay. Under a lease agreement Adaize drew up. She built herself a small place in the corner of the west field. A modest thing. A converted outbuilding she insulated, and wired herself with help from a young electrician named Marcus, who had been Paulette's full-time hand, and who Paulette released with a handshake and the comment that Elsa needed him more. She repaired the east field fencing. She replanted 3 of the 8 apple trees that had died while the land sat unattended. She cleared the shed, properly this time, every timber, down to the slab floor. And she patched the roof with reclaimed lumber and rehung the door, and put a simple latch on it that required no key. She left it unlocked every winter. The first person to use it was a man she never saw. She found the blanket she'd left on the shelf refolded on the step one morning in January, and the small stock of canned goods she'd put there redistributed, 2 cans gone and the rest neatly realigned. She replaced what was gone and left the blanket where it was. Celia Prentice had done this for decades without telling anyone. Elsa did not plan to tell anyone either. Paulette knew, because Paulette noticed everything. She came by one afternoon in February, just to look at the shed, and stood in the doorway for a moment, and then looked at Elsa and nodded once, the way she nodded when something was correct. She did not say anything about it. Neither did Elsa. Some things carry more weight when they are not explained. The bonds took 6 months to process through the right channels. But Adaize knew the process and walked her through it, and by the following October, $31,412 had been deposited into an account in Elsa's name. She put $22,000 of it into the land. Fencing, soil amendment, equipment repair, a new roof on the one functioning outbuilding that needed it. The rest she held in reserve. The way you hold a reserve when you understand that a piece of land is not a windfall, but a responsibility. She farmed. She was not a romantic about it. It was early mornings and late evenings and the particular physical exhaustion of work that does not stop because you are tired. But she had grown up on that land, and her hands already knew its rhythms, and there was something in the returning to it that settled her in a way nothing else quite had. As if the soil itself had been waiting for someone to come back and was not going to make a fuss about the fact that it had taken a while. She thought sometimes about what it had cost, the years of careful invisibility in her grandfather's house, the duffel bag, and the $7.60, and the bus shelter in the dark. She did not carry those things as wounds exactly, more as a kind of knowledge. The knowledge that you could be cast out of a place that was already yours, and still find your way back to it. That the people who decide you are nothing are not the authority on the question. She had been 18 and her grandfather had signed her out of his life on a Tuesday afternoon while she was at school. And she had come home to a manila folder on the table and a man in a chair who did not get up. And she had left the next morning with $7.60 and the memory of a hatch and the floor of a shed that nobody had touched in 30 years. She had gone back. She had opened it. And what she found down there was not just what Celia Prentice had left for her. It was the evidence that the land had always been hers. That someone who had loved it before her had made sure it would find the right hands, and had been patient enough to wait for them to arrive. The kind of patience that compounds in the dark, like interest, like trust, like the deep roots of 8 apple trees that had been planted before anyone living could remember and were still bearing fruit. If this story reached you tonight, we'd be glad to have you subscribe. There's a new story every week, and they all turn on the same quiet truth, even when the names and places change. And here's what we'd love to know. Has someone from an earlier generation, someone you may never have met, left something behind that eventually made its way to you? An object, a piece of land, a skill, a habit of generosity you recognized only when you found yourself repeating it? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. Take care of yourselves tonight. We'll see you in the next one.